Hello, and welcome to my third creativity project, where today I'll be talking about the history of the pipe organ. Now, to start off, let's look at the definition of a pipe organ. In order for an instrument to be considered a pipe organ, it must meet four requirements. Namely, does it have pipes which produce sound? Does it have a chamber that stores air? Is the air pressure mechanically generated? And finally, is the airflow to the pipes controlled by a keyboard? With those requirements in mind, the first pipe organ was the hydraulis. It was actually invented as far back as 264 BC by, I'm going to butcher this name here, by Cestibius of Alexandria. The hydraulis worked by having air pumps, which displaced the water in a tank, and as the displaced water tried to flow back into the tank, it pressurized the air, which then escaped out of the pipes when a key was pressed. The use of displaced water to provide constant air pressure was a very creative solution to the problem of providing air to multiple pipes at a time. The oldest hydraulis which archaeology has uncovered was discovered in Greece and dates all the way back to the year 1 BC. As it turns out, the hydraulis was a very popular instrument during the time of the Greek and Roman empires, probably due to its large range and the ability to play multiple notes at a time. We know from writings that it was often used in games and festivals. Other records also indicate that it was used in solo performance and competitions. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, around 476 AD, knowledge of the organ was lost to Greco-Roman culture. The Byzantine Empire in the east, however, continued to use the organ. The organ would remain unknown to the Western world until the year 757, when the Emperor Constantius sent an organ among other gifts as a peace offering to Pepin the Short, king of the Franks. Now we'll take a look at the Middle Ages and some of the developments that came to the organ during this time period. After the organ returned to the Western world, it continued to develop into many different variants. One of these was the portative organ, which was small enough to be held in the lap, one hand playing notes while the other pushed on a bellows. Because this version was portable, it was used mainly in secular music, outside churches. However, as the Middle Ages came to an end, so did its popularity. Near the end of the Middle Ages, we see the invention of the positive organ. Because this organ remained more popular than the portative organ, we know a bit more about it. This organ was larger and required a second person to operate the bellows. It also featured multiple ranks of pipes, meaning that different stops could be pulled to control which pipes sounded. This organ had both secular and church uses. A tabletop version, such as the one shown on the left, was generally used in the home, while the larger variant on the right was used in churches. Finally, the third type of organ developed in the Middle Ages was the church organ. Unlike the two types we just discussed, which were used largely for secular purposes, this organ was developed for church use. Though nobody really understands why the organ went from being a secular to religious instrument, we see the acceptance of the organ in churches around the 10th century. In fact, it is speculated that without the church, the development of the organ might not have progressed past the positive organ. This early church organ was also known as a blockwork organ, and was meant to be permanently installed in a church, with upwards of 50 pipes for each key. Unfortunately, no medieval blockwork organs remain intact, so little is known today about their exact construction. In the Middle Ages, the large church organs had only one sound. However, this changed with a few inventions in the 15th century, which allowed them to add stops and larger bellows to the church organs. In the 16th century, the biggest development was the addition of even more pipes and sounds, such as pipes that imitated trumpets and flutes. These pipes were, of course, controlled by the newly invented stops. With organs now containing hundreds of pipes, this is also the time period where we see the pipes being divided and organized into sections, giving the organ an artistic beauty, as well as that organ look, which we all recognize today. The Baroque period was the golden age of the organ. This period was largely characterized by a very ornamental, grandiose style, whose intention was to glorify God and give the viewer a sense of awe. The organs built during this period reflect these characteristics, with the pipes and framework covered with decorative molding and painting. Also, due to the polyphonic nature of Baroque music, the organ was the perfect instrument and was beloved by composers such as Bach and Handel. As tastes in music changed between the Baroque and Classical eras, the organ dropped out of popularity. Composers such as Haydn, Beethoven, and Mozart composed pieces for the organ, but not nearly as much as composers had done during the Baroque period. Classical music had a smoother tone and flowing rhythm, which did not suit the pipe organ, so it was not the first instrument of choice. Moving into the Romantic era, organs regained some popularity. Because the Romantic era was focused less on form and more on emotion, new features were added to the organ to allow for more emotional expression. French organist Aristide Cavaillé-Coll created many new enhancements. First, he refined the swell box, which allowed for greater control over volume and timbre of the note. He also invented the combination action, which was a pneumatic system which allowed the player to switch quickly between different configurations of the stops. Finally, he also created new piping, which imitated orchestral instruments such as the bassoon, the oboe, and the flute. As the organ became more expressive, Romantic composers began to use it more and more. Organs had a brief period of popularity in the early 20th century with the advent of silent films. Organs were built to produce an even wider variety of sounds to accompany these films, and were extremely popular in theaters. Finally, the last creative development reached the organ in the 20th century when it became fully electric. Though other electric organs were invented in the early 20th century, the most well-known and most successful was the Hammond organ, which was invented in 1934 by Lawrence Hammond. This was the first electric organ which could simulate different instruments, and made owning an electric organ almost just as good as the real thing. Even better, by the 1970s, electric organs had computerized circuitry which could store the sound of real instruments and play those upon key press. In conclusion, the organ remains a popular instrument today. Many creative adaptations throughout history have allowed the organ to adjust to current musical tastes and remain relevant. Some of these adaptations include expanding to imitate an entire orchestra, or becoming digital so as to fit into a small room and becoming accessible to anybody. The organ today remains a popular instrument in both secular and religious music. Thanks for watching.